All right, and finally, Matthew.
Hi, everybody. My name's Matt Rotundo. I am a writer from Omaha, Nebraska. I write science fiction, I write fantasy, I write horror. I have a couple of novels out in a series. The first one is called Petra. It looks like that. And the second book is called Petra Released. It looks like that. The third book is what I'm working on right now. It is called Petra Rising. It's sitting just over here out of frame currently, but that will be the third volume in that series. And yeah, I've had one or two characters I've disposed of in memorable ways.
All right. Well, let's just start off by getting a grounding of what we're talking about. What do you think defines whether or not a character is disposable?
Do you want us just to jump in, or?
Yeah, just go ahead and jump in. If it starts getting to be too much, I'll try moderating you.
Well, to me, a disposable character is one that, by their death or kidnapping or whatever happens to them, kind of spurs the protagonist into action. Now, it's not someone that's necessarily close to them. It doesn't have to be someone that we have a lot of background on. As a matter of fact, it's better if a disposable character, the reader is not too invested in it. It's more for the protagonist rather than the reader. That's my take on disposable characters.
I mean, I feel like really disposable characters are like that very classic, in an action movie, there's like 17 mooks and they come in and the protagonist fights them off. And there are things like that happen a lot in science fiction and fantasy, where it's like, and there's a battle and the person runs through with a sword and they kill like 7 different people. And you're like, I don't know, they kind of existed. They were just sort of like people-shaped things for the protagonist to go through. So you could see that like, ooh, it was a rough battle, or wow, this person is a stone cold badass, or, different, but it's just, they're entirely just sort of like people-shaped cutouts that exist to tell you something about the protagonist by what the protagonist does because of them or to them, or and they don't really have a life of their own.
Yeah. Yeah. Further to those points, the example that I come up with, like Alex, I think of the action movies, and the one that I think of is the love interest whose only reason for their existence is to get killed off so as to drive the main character into a homicidal rage, that kind of thing. I think that's a classic example of that sort of character.
Yeah. Well, I think we're talking about different levels. There's the battle sequences, the action adventure sequences. I almost, and it's a terrible thing, I almost don't think of them as characters. They're more set dressing. A thing that I've hi, my name is Claire, and I'm a warrior for disposable characters, because not battle, but the conversation that I've had with authors for decades now. You may have in your mind that this character is always going to be disposable, but they have to be 3-dimensional. Even if you don't show the full background, there has to be something there. Every word, every action, every character has to be there for a reason, to define the main character's viewpoint, to move the narrative forward. They have to do something. And my own hobby horse is that very often disposable characters are people of color, LGBT. And that immediately, like, why is this person gay? Why is this person a person of color? Tell me why. If you can explain why, that's fine. But there's, I was thinking about it as, when they announced what this panel was going to be. And I said, for those of us who have watched Star Trek, going, right. I can't recall if there was ever a female red shirt that was sent down to the planet. I don't think so. I don't think so.
No.
But so disposable characters, I think they need to have an inner light somehow, and they must do something. But that's your thing.
Oh, I think that I agree, Claire, that there are, I think, different categories of disposable characters.
Mhm,
To me,
mhm.
though, if you develop a character and you give them a backstory, and they are a recurring character, then they're really not disposable. I mean, to my way of thinking, then that becomes something else entirely. So, what do you? Are we agreeing with each other, or just saying it differently?
I
or,
think
yeah.
I think we are agreeing with each other, but I go one step farther.
Okay.
I think every character is disposable. Think about that for a minute, because even you know, and something Matthew, I think it was Matthew who said earlier about the love interest that just spurred. See, I'd get mad at the writer. I'd say, because you have to, even if it's a walk-on, a one-night stand or something, there has to be value. Now, I'm not saying it has to be a lot, but it has to be. So when the main character loses their best friend, the dying scene, the dying in the arms scene, if you don't buy that bond, then you're not going to buy the hero going off and, going insane and doing whatever they do. But yeah, so I kind of think we're all in agreement here. It's just the different levels and the methods, what those characters do.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree also that too many times those characters are, like you said, women or LGBT, and it's just the thing I don't like about that, obviously, and I don't know that anyone's going to disagree with me here, is that it's just poor craft. It's lazy writing.
Yeah.
When you do that, you kill off. You have a female character, and you kill her off because she's the most vulnerable, and her death's going to be the most tragic, whatever. And that's just lazy writing. It's trite. It's cliche, and it's poor craft. And so that sort of thing is what you want to try to avoid.
Right.
If the female character has to die, then the female character has to die. But that doesn't mean you have to be
Absolutely.
lazy and stupid in that person's characterization.
I mean, I think the kind of difference we're seeing is like there is a difference between actually establishing a character where they have their own inner life and just sort of like saying where everything is seen through the lens of, say your third person limited protagonist who is like the guy who's going to be super upset that his wife got put in a fridge. Like, I mean, where you're like, you only understand the other character who has been disposed of in order to provoke a reaction in both the protagonist and the reader through the lens of that protagonist's angst, where you're like, oh, well, she obviously must have been a super cool wife because this guy's real mad about things. I mean, like, it kind of reminds me, like, they took that trope and kind of did a little bit of a fun thing in, I know they were based off the comics. I didn't read the original comics, but the Vin Diesel movie Bloodshot, which was surprisingly non-terrible. And it was actually the last movie I saw before we went into lockdown, where they basically like kind of take him and keep inserting this memory into his head of different people murdering his wife. So then he goes into a manly rage and goes and kills the person who murdered his wife. And they're basically just using him as an assassin. And then like later in the movie, he finds out that she's still alive and was like, oh, you were killed in action like 5 years ago. I moved on with my life. And he's just like, tragedy. But it is that sort of thing of like, until that moment, she only exists as like this object for him to be really upset about.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Or the twist with episode 6 in Star Wars, and I'm just gonna call him the monster, right? So when Luke defeats the monster, you have this tiny moment of the monster handler who's that was his baby. And the baby's dead. And we don't know. Maybe he was planning on, I don't know, running away with the monster that night. Maybe he'd had enough of the fights. I don't know. But that little slice gave you, it was like less than 20 seconds on screen, but there was a whole backstory there. Yeah. And that's what I'm looking for even disposable characters. You don't need a lot on the page. You maybe need a sentence, and it doesn't have to be bloated. It doesn't have to be a lot. You can say in 3 words that will fill in a page, if you do it right. But.
I agree. I have an example, at the risk of tooting my own horn too much. I have an example of that kind of a character from my first book, from Petra. It was just this very minor character, never a viewpoint character or anything like that. He's just kind of a very minor person, and you don't learn much about him, but there is a brief interlude where he's very at first very antagonistic toward our main character, but then he kind of mellows out a little bit, and they have this kind of nice, just very brief interlude where they talk a little bit about, and he talks a little bit about his background, being an orphan and stranded and all of this kind of thing. And it doesn't take much. I don't know that he went on for more than half a page about that. And then spoiler alert, he dies at the end of that scene. But it didn't take much to, like you said, to accomplish that, to make him, a bit of a real person before he kicked it.
Yeah, but you added like 2 or 3 threads to the tapestry that weren't there before, and you made the book richer, I think. So yeah,
I like to think so, anyway.
Is that kind of a balance that needs to be struck between not just having your protagonist feel the impact of the death, but have the reader feel it, and kind of like, oh, hey, I know a little bit more about this person, and now I'm going to feel their absence some more.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think the danger that you run into, though, is that if the character becomes so important to the reader that they get angry. I mean, I have found that in my writing. I killed off characters that I really didn't think were that important. But boy, readers become invested in these characters. And Claire is shaking her head, so I know she knows exactly what I mean. They can get very upset when you kill off what you thought was a disposable character, whose main purpose was just to spur the protagonist into action. And you'd given them too much of a life, too much of a backstory.
I once edited a fantasy series, and the first book came in, and we edited it, and it was great. And then the second book came in, and she killed off the female character. And I said, "You can't do that." And she said, "Why? I hate her." And I said, "You may hate her, but the fans love her." And more to the point, and it goes back to the at the end of the day, it's the book. It's the book that's the important thing. And she was the reason for the other character's whole arc. And his whole arc had to go on for another like 4 or 5 books. And it wouldn't have worked, the noble killing and him going. No, it was so braided into the story arc, and she understood, and she did terrible things to that character. I said, you can torture that character as much as you want. You can have horrible things that fuels his journey. That's great. And she went, "I hate her." I said, "I know you hate her. but you created her." And when she finally got to kill her off, she was so happy. But she couldn't kill her off for a period of time because
I think I don't necessarily know that it's always a bad thing for the reader to be angry that somebody has died. I mean, I want my readers invested in those
Sure.
characters. I want them to be, and if they get really upset about the death of a minor character, I feel good about that. Quite honestly, I feel like I've done my job. So I'm okay with that. I mean, I suppose there are extremes. If somebody gets so mad at the death of a character that they throw the book across the room and they're not going to read any more of it, okay, I might have crossed a line there. But generally, as long as you keep reading, I'm okay with you being upset.
We touched earlier on some of the harmful tropes that get too much LGBT, minority, women being the ones who get disposed of thoughtlessly. What do we think about inverting that? Having sticking the man in the refrigerator, for example.
A plus.
Yeah.
I mean, the women have been in fridges for so many decades. The men can go for the next 20 years.
Yeah.
Well, I think if this is
Everyone say hi to my wife.
Hi.
I'll say hi, dear. Okay. Anyway, I'll tell you, I thought about this question when I first saw it, and I mean, I get the impulse. I get the yes. The men deserve to be fridged for a few decades. Yeah, I get that. That's fine. I don't like it personally, simply because I think that just inverting the trope doesn't really solve the problem. I still think it's poor craft. I think if you've got if your character is only just a paper cutout, that's poor craft. Your character should live and breathe a little bit, and so I don't know that we combat poor craft with more poor craft. I think it's better to combat poor craft with better craft.
Well, I think the fridging thing is not so much about like you had a paper cutout that was a poorly crafted character that got murdered. I think the issue there, particularly when it comes to like women characters, minority characters, bury your gays and all that, is because you actually do get these characters who are fully realized, excellent characters that, a lot of members of your readership or audience, it's actually the only person for them to kind of like latch onto. And then that person gets killed solely for the benefit of the protagonist to like have some manly pain, which is, and it's as flippantly as I said, like bury the men for the next 20 years. There is an interesting question which I think goes to like a larger like media criticism, kind of like the stories we tell as a society question. So like, okay, we keep murdering off women so that men get to feel something. And that is the story we keep telling. So is it even, because of what we have culturally trained ourselves, would it even be believable to fridge a man so a woman can have like woman pain and go on a path to vengeance? Or would all of the readers and watchers be like, oh no? I mean, it's weird.
I think they would. I think if someone harmed my son or my sweetheart, oh yeah, I'd be right out there with a butcher knife. I think
but I think it's that women are allowed to have emotional space and get like that without having somebody fridged, which it feels like, especially because of like toxic masculinity, the only way men get to be, have that kind of well of emotion is if you like murder their wife. Which
absolutely,
is like,
absolutely.
Leave
absolutely.
Liam Neeson alone.
Yeah.
Like,
I think I'm so happy to be living in a time where the tent is getting larger.
Oh yeah.
And that people are learning not to do the lazy craft, whether it's their evolution as writers, whether it's that and a combination of what I like to call God's spotlight, when people kind of go, can we look at this? And Alex's point about the reader, because the book and then the reader. Those are the two things that are most important. And if you are someone who has never seen yourself on the page, and you do, and then you're killed, that it kind of hurts. It really does. And so I to address Matthew's point, a time limit, no. An awareness, yes. Sometimes it'll be the guy in the fridge. Sometimes it'll be a girl in the fridge. Please, God, no, not a child or an animal.
Yeah, no cats.
No animals, no children, but play with it. And if that's your default, ask yourself why. And just by asking the why, that'll tell you something about yourself, about your world, and how the world really is. Because there's a lot of different people in the world with a lot of different viewpoints, and the more stories we can tell, I think the better off we are.
I agree there, and all of that touches on the larger topic of bias and unconscious bias. I think we see these we see so many minority or female or LGBT characters bumped off in this way because of a cultural bias that you might not even be aware of as a bias. And the way to challenge that is to do exactly what you said, Claire. Ask yourself why. You challenge every choice. As a writer, I would say to another writer, challenge every choice you're making. You make a lot of these choices early on in the story process. Okay, whether to make a character male or female, or whether to make them straight or gay, cis or trans. You make those choices early, and a lot of times, if you don't challenge those choices early on, then you run the risk of letting your biases make those choices for you. Because people have default characters. I mean, I will be quite honest. Any character that I originally conceive of almost always is a white guy. They're almost always initially going to be a white guy. And if I never challenged those assumptions about those characters, I would have nothing but white guys in my books. Right. Which wouldn't bear any resemblance to the real world. So you got to challenge it. You got to challenge it early.
I mean, I feel like another thing to challenge, even just like with the basic character setup, is the reason like the women in fridges thing is like a joke at this point, a very bitter, angry joke, is because it's become such a trope. Like, oh, we need to motivate the guy and let him feel sad and angry, so we're gonna like kill his girlfriend. Right. And that's another thing to kind of challenge, is like, why, in order to get him to do a thing, do you need to murder his girlfriend?
Yeah.
Like, why is that apparently the only thing that will motivate this poor man to like get off his butt and do something? And I'm not saying like you can, I'm not saying you can never kill a character off, but I feel like a lot of times that kind of does almost become the lazy choice, because you're just like, oh, well, everyone knows that you'd be super upset if you killed your boyfriend or whatever, as opposed to like, I have to do a little more complex character work of explaining why this person gives a crap about something, which is harder.
Yeah, you're absolutely right there, Alex. And it is too easy. It's too convenient sometimes to just kill somebody off. And so that's another challenge you can make. Does this person actually have to die? Right. Is there something else that we could do? Yeah.
I'd like to ask a question to the writers, because it's something that always intrigues me. Have you ever encountered or created what you thought was a disposable character, and they kind of crept up behind you and went, no, no,
Yes.
no.
Absolutely.
You sweet summer child.
that was one thing too that amazed me when I first started writing, and I would go to a lot of conferences. I took a lot of writing classes, and I would hear authors say, I tried to make this character do this and they wouldn't do it. And I thought to myself, that is such bullshit. You're the writer. You can make your character do anything you want. I know, but I learned really quickly that no, if you establish a character well enough, they're not going to do something that's out of character. And I just, as you said, I have absolutely created characters that I thought were going to appear in one book that have ended up appearing in every single sequel.
Yeah.
Because they developed as a character and they became so interesting that I wanted to keep them alive.
Yeah, absolutely. I've done the same. Characters that I just thought didn't give, much of, 2 seconds of thought about this character. They're basically, for lack of a better term, they're basically a spear carrier.
Right.
And I didn't really have any use for them. And then I find out a little bit more about them and it deepens them. And all of a sudden they become a lot more important to the story. Yeah, I absolutely have had that happen.
Yeah, I mean, I had a character that I didn't even necessarily intend for him to be disposable, but he was supposed to die in the first book. Not to like necessarily motivate it, but because shit is dangerous and he was in a bad place and he made some really poor choices. And then I got to the second book and I was like, no, I can't kill him. His murder husband is so sad. And then there was like an entire giant weird plot line about why he isn't dead. And it might not necessarily be a good thing.
I say we've talked a lot about killing off characters for protagonist motivation. What about just setting up your world and showing how dangerous the situation is, for example?
You mean it's kind of like the save the cat thing, like there's the save the cat moment in the movie where you have like the guy who's really mean and terrible, and then he saves the cat, so you're like, oh, he's gonna get better. And I feel like you get the opposite effect where you're like, we're going to show that the villain is a bad dude because they're going to do the classic, this is the price of failure and kill their underling that, made some kind of minor mistake or whatever. I don't know. It's like, it's weird because sometimes it's just really cheap and sometimes you're just like, this is necessary shorthand. And, I don't know. It's like, there's never a one size fits all declaration you can really make other than you need to really question, why am I doing this?
Right.
Am I just being lazy? Because writers, at our heart, are really lazy people.
Absolutely. But I feel the same way. I mean, I've done that certainly. I've got characters that, they're in a dangerous situation. I've got, Petra's a story about a prison planet. It's obviously not a safe place. People are going to die. And that's, when I talked about that minor character that I killed off midway through the book, that was kind of the reason for, his death. Well, other than also he served no further plot purpose after that point. I think that you do that sometimes, and it's necessary if you want to establish that you're writing a story in a place where it is very dangerous, and you need to impress upon the reader the danger of doing this.
Or if you have a battle scene or something. I mean, that's one thing I actually ran into in one of my novels where I built this entire cast of found family, and I loved every single one of them. And then they go into this battle against overwhelming odds. And I was like, but I don't want any of them to die. And then my agent had to sit me down and be like, it strains all credulity for all of these people to come out of this alive. You need to pick some and they have to go. Then everyone can feel sad about it. And I was like, no, my agent made me kill some people. He's so mean.
But once again, the disposable is kind of a misnomer because they're doing something. They are disposable in that you are using them to do a thing, but it can be really, really hard. And makes the experience 3D. When I teach writers workshops, I talk about a thing, and at the end of the book, for genre, I'm not talking about literary fiction, but for genre, there's something that I like to call TM VWE. And what VWE is, vicarious winning experience. If at the end of the book, the person feels like they've gone along the journey, that they've had some emotional resonance, whether it's happiness, whether it's a cathartic kind of, oh my God, you have just dragged me through hell, along with the characters, and there's true sorrow and sadness, and maybe a glimmer, usually first book in a trilogy, right? Horrible sadness, terrible, but a glimmer of hope. And we're going, we're going to do this. Those disposable characters, each in their own way, will be a cog in that vicarious winning experience.
Good way
Yeah,
of
okay.
looking at it. That's really useful.
Yeah.
It is. So we've talked about like the characters who are barely characters, who are just cutouts, there to be cannon fodder or whatever. Is there a way to do that that's more interesting, or are those always going to be best, just kind of like your faceless stormtroopers who you don't even see any humanity in, they're just a suit who gets shot at?
I think part of that depends on like the kind of book it is, because if it's like, like an action or military sci-fi or fantasy, there are just gonna have to be like some faceless mooks that get shot because your protagonist needs to shoot someone to be like, I'm a badass.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The red shirts. The red shirts. Let's
The red
start.
shirts.
Yeah.
The red
I think
shirts.
that's
The red shirts.
Because I guess the red shirts are really there to be like, oh, this is a very dangerous planet and you could die.
Yeah.
Claire, you'd brought up an example from Return of the Jedi, and I can think of another example of this, of someone who is cannon fodder. It's toward the climax of the film there, and you've got the Ewoks battling on Endor, and Ewoks are getting blown up and dying left and right. And there's this one moment where there's this explosion, and a couple of Ewoks fall down dead. And then there's a moment passes, and one of the Ewoks gets up because he's been faking his death, and he shakes his companion, says, "Come on, let's go." And the companion doesn't move because he's actually dead. And he sits down there and is despairing. And that took just a couple of seconds of screen time. But what a great moment that was. What a powerful moment that was. Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah. The cardboard cutout, you're going to need some of that. And you don't necessarily want the main character to stop in the middle of battle and go, oh, look at the horror of war. And no, you don't want that. But you could have it either at the beginning of the battle, in nerves, or at the end of the battle. And looking out at the blah, 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 blah. Not during the battle, but yeah, there are going to be cutouts. There's, and again, I don't really think of them as characters. I think that more as set dressing. But if you can use descriptive stuff, while you're going through the battle sequence, fighting, in describing how the character is fighting the other people, that, clothing, movements, etc. It doesn't really give them agency, but it fills in the background.
Well, I also think too that there's an important thing that can be done there too, because you can let the hero look. He's won, he's victorious, but you can let the hero look at what's happened and reflect. Yeah. Yes, there was a reason that he did this. There was a reason that they had this major battle, but look at the cost. And I think that makes a hero, that gives another dimension to a hero, so that he's not just saying, yes, victorious, look at all these people that we killed. He's actually reflecting that there's a loss. There is a loss here, not only in his own men or animals or whatever it is, but in the because like we always say, the villain has his own story too. The villain is a hero of his own story. So it's
Well,
go ahead. Yeah.
yeah, and you could even have the hero go, "Good, I'm glad they're dead."
Yeah, that
That
super valid.
That's emotion.
Emotion.
Any kind of emotion, but have emotion.
Yes.
Because if you have no reaction, then it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I wanted to like pop in with a book recommendation. Someone who does like a lot of this stuff really well. Matt Wallace's book Savage Legion that just came out this year. Oh my God, it's amazing for like the battle sequences, and then after the battle sequences being like, I'm glad I'm alive. There's a lot of dead people, and like the entire kind of conceit of the book, the entire Savage Legion is basically made of what would be disposable characters that an empire is throwing against its enemies. So it has like, I totally recommend it as like a thing to look at and see kind of how some of this stuff is done really well.
Have you read his Sin du Jour books?
I have, and it is like 7 novellas of food porn. Like,
but it also has
it has some really great character stuff.
And almost every one of them is a disposable character.
Mm-hmm.
And you have people of color, and you have LGBT, and you have, and you're reading these books, and there's action sequences, and you think to yourself, oh God, don't kill off that person. Oh God, please don't kill off that person.
Yep.
Yeah. No, I love Matt's work. I love Matt's work. So.
How does it affect your story or your view of a character when a character who has been killed comes back? Does that undo their death? Is it just for the service of the fans who like that character sometimes?
Well, the character that I talked about earlier that I killed off, I actually I had him not come back, but he appeared in my protagonist's dreams. And it kind of helped her move on because she was upset about his death. And I think it kind of helped the readers too, because he was saying, I've moved on, you can move on. There's more waiting for you out there. So that's the way I did it. So
that's a good way to be.
The character that I killed off and felt the need to bring back so his murder husband wouldn't be sad. I mean, like a lot of really interesting stuff came out of it just because he didn't come back right away. So everyone thought he was dead and everyone was really sad. So then he came back and everybody was like, well, we're happy you're not dead, but we're also kind of mad about things now because we went through this entire trauma. And then he came back, and the way he came back, he was a little different, and there were some things that were a little wrong about him, and that was like an entire. So I feel like as long as death should. I think a lot of what we're coming down to is like when we get out of like the set dressing level, death shouldn't be cheap.
Yeah.
And that means if you're going to bring someone back, that should be even more expensive, and it should come with a lot of like really crunchy stuff.
Right. Right.
I'm sorry, Matthew. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to, just building on what Alex said. I really think that death works best when it's permanent. And if you're going to bring a character back from the dead, I think that some part of them needs to die. And I think they need to, if they're going to come back, they can't be coming back as the same person they were, So like when you have Spock dying and then coming back, for a while there, it works because he's not quite right. Unfortunately, though, they come back to the point where he's back to being old Spock. He's back to normal, and that's always kind of a bit of a letdown. Same thing happened with Buffy.
I was just gonna say Buffy.
Yeah,
Buffy's
she
mom.
was messed
Yeah.
up for a while, but
Oh,
then
yeah.
she basically eventually gets back to the point where she's good old Buffy again. I think George R.R. Martin does a good job. If he does bring a character back from the dead, that character is not the same person they were. I think of Lady Stoneheart. She comes back from the dead, but she isn't Catelyn Stark anymore.
Right.
And so that's the kind of death that if you're going to bring someone back from the dead, that's the way I think you should do it.
You bring up a good point, Matthew, particularly with Buffy. Have you all seen Angel?
Oh yeah,
The
yes.
Angel series?
absolutely.
I full disclosure, I've always been and always will be Team Spike. So when they brought him
Me
back,
too.
in Angel, it was handled very well because he wasn't able to really come back. And he was a different person. He was changed. He was changed by his death. He was changed by his redemption at the end of Buffy. And he was a different person. Angel was still Angel. I have no ill will, but Team Spike. But yeah,
Absolutely.
but I thought that was handled well.
Yeah, well, and I think maybe sometimes when it doesn't feel like it's got enough weight to it, part of it is you're like, the character hasn't changed, and part of it is because it feels like their relationship with everyone else hasn't changed, and maybe some of that is because someone was like, oh, I didn't want to kill this person off, and I'm just bringing them back, and it's fine. But some of it is, I mean, I don't think a lot of us have experience in our own personal life of someone dying, and then like a year later they come back to life, and even knowing what that would actually feel like. So it's all very much extrapolation, but it does feel like there would be some kind of change in your relationship, even if the other person hasn't changed that much, where you're like, I now suddenly understand what it means to have my life without you, but now you're like, I've reshaped my life, and now you've returned into it, and that makes things different. And now I have like this realization of how fragile and mortal you are, and maybe that changes. But yeah, it feels like all of these relationships should change, and sometimes that doesn't feel like entirely thought through.
Have you ever dealt with estranged family members who come back after about 10 or 15 years? We could have a talk off to the side. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're down
Now you're
to our
back from
last.
outer space.
All right, we're down to our last 5 minutes. I have not seen Q&A, so I'll go to the audience questions. Do we have any final thoughts or plugs for your work so people can know where to find you?
I will totally plug my work because I forgot to do it at the beginning, which I know, like, all of my editors are screaming behind me. So you can find everything that I have ever done at my website, alexax.com or katsudan.net. It's an old domain, don't worry about it. And the extremely cool cover art you see behind me is from Hunger Makes the Wolf, and it is a completed duology with the sequel Blood Binds the Pack. That's science fiction. It's biker space witches, labor unions. It's great. And then I also have a steampunk pirate novella series. They're rail pirates, so from Queen of Swords, that starts with Murderer on the Titania and other steam-powered adventures.
Great.
Well, my things can all be found at the Broadway Book Ball. So I will plug the Broadway Book Mall, both the Anna Strong series, the Fallen Siren series, and the new sci-fi book. Second book is due to come out, and Broadway Book Mall has them all. So
I've already plugged my book, so I'll just refer people first to my website, which is MatthewSRotundo.com. You can find any kind of anything that you want to find out, information about my books and my short fiction and such. You can also sign up for my newsletter. Anyone who signs up for my newsletter automatically gets a free gift, which is an award-winning short story of mine. So sign up for the newsletter. Even if you're not interested in the newsletter, get the free gift anyway. And then if you want to, you can unsubscribe at any time. So you got nothing to lose there. I'll also mention that I do have an author's alley. I'm in the author's alley here at MileHiCon. So you can feel free to check that out as well.
Great. Well, I don't really have to plug Tor because, I think you all know what Tor is. However, I have a Halloween treat if you like horror. We're starting a new imprint next fall called Nightfire. And last year we did an original audio anthology, Come Sit by the Fire, which you can get on iTunes and Google Play and all that. And we just dropped volume 2. And if volume 1 scared me out of my wits, volume 2 has, I don't think I'm ever going to go sleep again. There's some really good stuff and it's totally free. So if you go on iTunes, Google Play, whatever, it's Come Sit by the Fire, I think is the title, the exact title, but you poke, you'll find it, and it's free and it's creepy as hell. So that's it for me.
All right, we'll just wrap up. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for giving your time this morning in this strange new format for a convention. And since we're just getting started on Friday morning, I hope you enjoy the rest of the con.
Well, and thank you for moderating.
Yes.
Thank you. You did a great
Good job. Good
Appreciate
job.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right.
Hey, thanks, everybody.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
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 Bye, everyone.